Yep, I think we're online. Good evening, everyone. Good morning and good afternoon if you are not in Europe. This year's Sliver lecture, titled Research Cultures, we're proposing the question of what is a research in the architectural field and how it is situated in professional practice, academic institution, or design project itself. We are thinking how it leads to knowledge production or a method of instrumentation. In the winter semester, we have the pleasure to have Neyran Turan for tonight, followed by Al Wiseman from Forensic Architecture, Jeremy Teal, and Jenny Sabin to present some of the works that they've been doing with experimental approaches and inspiring outcomes. For the first lecture, we have Neyran here, the Associate Professor of Architecture at UC Berkeley and funding partner at NEMESTUDIO. After the lecture, it will be followed by Maja Ozvaldic, the Sliver Lecture Curator, Assistant Professor at Angewandte, and currently leading the Mobility Studio at UCLA with Greg Lin. For those who've been to this year's Venice Biennale, you shouldn't be unfamiliar with the Turkish pavilion titled For Dioramas, designed and curated by Neyran. The yellow monotone four-room mise-en-scène composed into a wonderful storytelling in space that seeks to explore what and how architecture can contribute to the environment in the light of current climate crisis, beyond all sorts of technology dependencies. Neyran's work focuses on alternative forms of environmental imagination and their capacity for new aesthetic and political trajectories within architecture and urbanism. Some of her research and projects can be found in the recent publication, Architecture as Measure, which I also have here with me.
Oh, that's sweet.
Yeah, and as well as some of the journals published by Harvard Graduate School of Design titled New Geographies. Neyran's office, NEMESTUDIO, is based in San Francisco Bay Area. The studio is also awarded with some of the most prestigious award for young architects, including the Architectural League New York Prize and also the Graham Foundation Awards. So without further ado, let's welcome Neyran for the lecture.
Hello, thanks for having me. Thanks so much for the invitation, Caio and the Institute. I'm really happy to be here and excited about future conversations. So let me share the screen and you can tell me if there's any. I'm hoping it's fine. Okay, yeah. Thank you. I will share with you today some of my recent work, which aims to prompt slightly unfamiliar couplings between environmental imagination and architectural specificity. I will present some recent projects, and I will touch on the book Architecture as Measure that Caio also mentioned. I will start with this slide to give a kind of visual snapshot of some of the work produced by myself in the last couple of years and my architectural office, NEMESTUDIO, as Caio mentioned, based in San Francisco area, founded by myself and Mete Sönmez. Ranging from commissioned exhibitions, client-driven buildings, to publications and speculative work, the work has tried to take on questions about architectural representation and environmental imagination, but also reflected on the ways in which architectural knowledge is produced through paying close attention to its specific placement in the world. In relation to that, let me start with my book, Architecture as Measure, for which I need to mention a date, March 2020, is the official actually release date of this book, but also it is the official date that World Health Organization characterized COVID-19 as a pandemic. and when most places in the world started to go into lockdown. So beyond the practicalities and problems of releasing a book at the peak moment when most bookstores were actually closing down, I have come to appreciate the strange coincidence, especially thinking of the premise of the book itself. Architecture's measure positions climate change as a cultural and political idea that requires a renewed planetary imagination. By planetary here, I mean the vast geotemporal scales through which climate emergency accelerates. But the book starts with the provocation that we should stop understanding planetary imagination purely as an isolated idea of preserving nature, or as technological management, or as visualization of large-scale phenomena. Instead, the book argues that it's important at this moment for architecture to consider its potential from within its inner workings, techniques, and histories. In that sense, the main motivation, it could be said, behind the book, is to provoke unconventional collisions between the quotidian familiar and the planetary unfamiliar. By quotidian here, I mean, again, architecture's disciplinary inner workings and specificities. In that way, the book can be thought of as an invitation to boost architecture's planetary effect by collapsing the centers and peripheries of the discipline, by colliding its very outside with its core interior. In relation to these ambitions, there are a set of projects like this in the book that use familiar architectural strategies on what is considered to be unfamiliar within a disciplinary setting and bring them into the space of architectural consciousness. Here, for instance, I'm showing you a drawing from the Museum of Lost Volumes, an earlier project from 2015, which is presented in the second chapter of the book. The project imagines a museum of ancient resource extraction ruins for a time when mining is an obsolete practice, and its ruins are treated like ancient monuments or extinct species to be housed in a natural history museum. In other words, it's a museum that preserves geologic ruins that once belonged to the resource extraction of rare earth minerals mining. So the project misuses familiar techniques and forms from architectural history by dismantling their original myths to tell perhaps a more difficult story. For instance, a geologic section here takes the monumental and sublime qualities of 18th century architect Boulay's cenotaph, which is in this case becomes a place for commemoration for mineral extraction. It imagines a collision between a disciplinary future and a disciplinary past as a way to reflect on our current moment. Here, before getting to other projects, it might be useful to talk about why the emphasis on imagination here, especially when thinking about the environment and when it's clearly urgent actions are already overdue. But it's precisely because of the urgency of our current moment that I'm driven to the significance of imagination. Imagination matters because, as Law Professor Jedediah Birdy, who's someone who really inspired the book itself, beautifully elaborates in his writing on the Anthropocene, he says imagination is about how we see and how we learn to see the world. It is about picturing it, assessing what matters and how we have a stake in it. So as evidenced in the COVID-19 pandemic and the recent Black Lives Matter process throughout the world, the intricacies of systemic injustice and climate emergency call for unconventional approaches that can help us to see and learn to see differently, and to make sense of the collision between the quotidian and the planetary. Second, imagination matters because, as has been pointed out by many geographers, climate change is not about a self-righteous battle between quote-unquote nature and quote-unquote humans, but the consequence of centuries of extractivism, colonialism, racism. Simply put, the humans who are the most responsible for climate change are the ones who are more insulated from its effects, whereas those who are the least accountable feel its greatest effects. So another image from the project, here I'm showing from the Museum of Volumes, is actually the museum's grand tour, an excursion to several one-to-one scale rare earth replicas. Here we're seeing replicas that are inverted upside down, reminding of the ziggurats of ancient civilizations, and visitors take perhaps this grand tour in the project to these geographic ruins to be terrified with their artificial magnificence. The customary grand tour of archaeological sites taken by the architectural nobles of the 17th and 18th centuries is now replaced with another kind of tour in this project, this time to the ruins and monuments of anthropogenic climate change. You see on the left the famous Rainer Benham, his 1981 photograph when riding a bike in the American desert, or Robert Venturi at the corner, his renowned pose looking at the view of Las Vegas in 1968. Perhaps all of these have a different relevance here. Perhaps they are both puzzled and clueless with a shared question. Maybe they're thinking, what happens when the new Rome, which is this noble place, is not Los Angeles, in this case of Benham, because he was saying that the new Rome is Los Angeles, or even not Las Vegas anymore, but planetary wasteland. And finally, imagination matters because it's the ultimate and most necessary ingredient for meaningful structural change in architecture and related design disciplines. Instead of, on the one hand, pretending that inequalities of labor, colonialism, resource extraction are things that are external to the work that we do as architects, and on the other hand, dismissing questions of aesthetics, appearance, and technique as trivial matters. What kinds of words are possible if we stop doing those things and are willing to understand the embeddedness, the collisions, and specificities of these aspects within our practices and disciplinary imaginations? These questions are important not only for dismantling archaic assumptions and abolishing entrenched power structures in our discipline, but also rebuilding future foundations towards alternative worlds that are yet to be envisioned. Another project, the Middle Earth project that you see here, has similar kinds of ambitions. The project repurposes the staging of a diorama in a natural history museum as a way to speculate on climate change. Natural history dioramas are interesting. They are, I'm here showing you a Los Angeles museum, which I've been, are constructs of fake natures made into a microcosmic theater stage. Here in Natural History Museum, we see depictions of idealized natures in which environmental controversies are hidden and replaced with magic and wonder. For this project, we were really inspired by photographer Richard Barnes' work on dioramas, which debunk dioramas' magic and wonder by an emphasis on maintenance and repair. They're kind of back of house. In the photograph, for instance, that you see on the right top, which is called Man with Buffalo from 2007, a maintenance worker is inside the diorama vacuuming the artificial snow while facing the buffalo taxidermy. In the foreground, we see metal studs, plywood frames of the diorama actually in construction. So the Middle Earth project repurposes the diorama in a natural history museum to demystify its myths about natural idealism and restages new myths that dismantle the very power structures that originated dioramas and the climate change itself. Through this and other similar projects that we have done at NEMESTUDIO for the last couple of years, two things are at interplay, I might say. On the one hand, through the restaging of familiar models and replicas like diorama, theater set, with the messy stories and controversies of resource extraction, waste, and environmental injustice in the Anthropocene, the notion of nature as an ideal and universal model is denaturalized. On the other hand, a slowed down attention to construction and assembly is proposed by revealing the mundane details of these models, making and unmaking. For instance, if you look at these two drawings, you're going to see that the dioramas are actually depicting, ocean trash in one case. Here it's about deforestation, but they themselves are in construction and maintenance. So even we're kind of, seeing that kind of background. This attention to detail is something, it's an interest about architecture's politics of appearance in relation to the kinds of things that are embedded in it and things that surround making of architecture. You can also think of it as a search for an alternative kind of specificity or engagement through an attention to subtlety and detail. Here, for instance, I'm showing you a project manual of instructions from 2019, which focuses on mundane aspects of architectural assembly, demolition, and staging. So architectural potentials of such confrontations between representation and construction and between assembly and disassembly have driven most of our projects at NEMESTUDIO for the last couple of years. Our Junk Their Ruin project, for instance, from 2018, which focuses on the constructedness of images themselves. Here we are seeing a drawing from the project as an assembly on top on the left, and a disassembly of the same image on the right, the bottom. Or projects like this one, which tries to push the limits of architectural representation itself. It was actually an installation that was designed as a virtual gathering space for Architectural League of New York's annual Beaux-Arts Ball Party last year, which was obviously reconceptualized, had to be reconceptualized as a virtual gathering, about 200 people or more, due to COVID-19 restrictions. And it took place on a new digital platform where users could meet online and have a synchronic spatial experience and mingle together, like as if they're in a real party. So here, for instance, you're seeing basically these little dots here are people that are actually experiencing this model together. And here I'm just, zooming out and, seeing what so when people come next to one another in this new platform, they can talk, hear each other, like in no physical space, but when they move apart from one another, they cannot see each other or hear each other. So, and then when they are inside, like when they're inside the small, I don't know, can you hear the sound? Okay. So when they're inside, they're just presented with these kinds of tricks of kind of fake gaps of the 2D and 3D. So what they're looking at, they have to question their experience actually in this representational landscape. So in other projects like this one, 9 Islands, a conversation between representation and construction is achieved this time through the quotidian and seemingly banal aspects of architecture, of materiality, through a planetary framework. This project was originally prepared for the third Istanbul Design Biennale titled Are We Human? And it was created by Beatrice Colomina and Mark Ridley. Here, the project looks at the temporal and spatial longspan of architectural materiality. A long span that helps us to understand buildings as piles of matter and stuff, which all circulate and construct before, while, and after the building is built and participate within a complicated array of logistics, supply chains from quarries, processing facilities, to construction assemblies, and finally landfills. So beyond the performance metrics of professional building rating systems, in the supply chain literature, they call it the lead time. The lead time between extraction and waste is a kind of invisible in architectural imagination when we think about materials. Just to give it a scale, each year approximately 3 billion tons of raw materials are used in the manufacturing of building products and components worldwide. And it's estimated that over 10,000 different materials are used in the construction and use of buildings, many of which are, obviously non-renewable mineral resources that are depleted. In addition to movement of construction materials, there is the mostly overlooked labor dimension. Think of the number of people involved helping to extract, assemble, repair, and demolish these materials within these buildings. So 9 Islands project engages this long span of architecture materiality through a geographic perspective. It consists of an archipelago of 9 islands presented through 5-feet tall models on pedestals, each complemented by one drawing. So each island represents a particular lavish or widely used building materials such as marble, wood, glass, travertine, etc. The upper part of each model consists of quote unquote a monument, an archetypical building mass that is finished with a specific material. And as a opposition to this upper part, the lower part of each model consists of a rock, a formless landmass through which the raw matter is extracted. Here you see the project assembled as an installation and the stark contrast between the finished surfaces of the archetypical forms at the top with the formlessness of this naked resource origin below aims to call attention to this long span in between them. And as its similar double register is used in the drawings of the project, consists of 2 parts. Each drawing depicts one material. For instance, we see concrete on the left or ladder on the right, while the upper part of each drawing positions one building material through a particular architectural lens. The lower part depicts a daily life scene from the wider part, a lifespan of the same material. For instance, for aluminum, we're seeing, very classic aluminum details on the top. And below, we see a processing of aluminum, actually, industrial processing of it. Here, we're seeing a travertine wall on the top, and low, we're seeing the shipping of that material. And same story goes in the other materials, like styrofoam details, and trash in the ocean, or roofing of construction of copper below, meaning the construction process, whereas copper as pipes in the building, in the section. So the upper drawings depict architectural spaces or specifications as still lifes with traces of humans, but without their actual presence. There's no humans in the upper part of the drawings. Whereas in the lower part, they showcase overpopulated human activity in places that we don't actually see humans or think about humans so much. Don't forget the title of this Biennale was Are We Human? So we were putting humans in places that like extraction sites or waste sites or construction or things that places not in architectural spaces per se. This was our response perhaps to the idea of Are We Human? So in that light, the project calls for an architectural imagination that juxtaposes the planetary imaginary of these landscapes with the extremely quotidian aspects in relation to the material practice of architecture. Another project that expands on these ideas, this time with a different focus, would be the new Cadavre Qui from 2017, which looks at the relationship between representation and construction, mostly through digital images and questioning architecture's materiality through them. The project consists of 4 buildings whose forms are created via a sampling process of digital ready-made objects, almost like a surrealist cadavre qui. Each building investigates questions of assembly, ruination, and waste. It starts with, the project really looks at actually the idea of accumulation, digital accumulation in digital space this time. And each architectural assembly is composed of digital found objects from the 3D warehouse, ranging from everyday objects, building elements, primitive forms, natural features, which all constitute a family whose listing is kind of odd. When compiled together, though, they constitute an odd grouping of objects deprived from their original category. So it's hard to categorize these things. They're just stuff in their material or in their scale. And then when they come together to create a building, each assembly is initially on the left a scaleless assembly, an archetype perhaps, and in which various, here's an HVAC thing, for instance, a primitive form on top of it. And they have, produced these kinds of unfamiliar compositions. And each project, when they become scaled, there's a scale now, so it's a building. And they each assembly stages and exploits the potential of this archetypical composition and turns it into a building, but then eventually gets destabilized with the materiality of its mass. So, for instance, the project, the one that I showed you, in this case, here is the kind of more undermined version. In that case, the materiality of the project here both defines it, but also undermines it in these compositions. So by depicting the formation of an architecture project from the accumulation of digital debris from the 3D warehouse to the material debris of waste, the project builds alternative linkages between architecture, digital media, and materiality, and opens up a range of conversations about aesthetics and political concerns for architecture and public imagination. And the drawings of the new Cadavre Qui project ABC here also allude to these aspects by presenting each assembly as almost like a scaled physical model that is being photographed. While the entourage, if you pay attention to the foreground of these images, for instance, the entourage in the foreground depict the same scale of this building. So we understand this giant machine and we know the building, they're in the same scale. Or this, another vehicle in the same scale of the building and the people as well. But the entourage in the back background of each image. Here, the lamp, here, the kind of water bottle. Give hints about the scaled condition, meaning it depicts it as a scaled model and gives us a kind of idea about the environment of this model. So here are other examples from the same project. Here, there's a picnic basket, a drainage pipe, a kind of grater on top of an arcade, and then it turns to a kind of train station with a terrazzo finish. And here we see the kind of disassembled version of the same project. And of course, the materiality or the rubbish that is embedded within the digital also needs to be thought in relation to the residues of digital processes themselves. When we were doing this project, we were really inspired by a lot of artists, for instance, the work of Clement Valla, whose work works with these binaries of the copy and the original, as well as the digital and physical, when they kind of lose their meaning because of the glitches that exist between layers and layers of translation between, the physical and the digital. Here, another form from the project where it's kind of this CMU block, primitive forms, and actually there's a kind of a metronome in the back, and then they create this kind of small building. So there's a little video, sound-wise, there should be a sound pretty soon, not now, but it kind of gives a kind of sense of what. Can you hear the sound? Okay, yes. Just depict this in a little bit more humorous way, the process of the project in a kind of video format. So we see these, almost accumulation, and then it jumps into the kind of formation of these things, like how do you create a composition? And kind of, every process that an architect goes through, but we don't like to kind of show these things or talk about them, right? And even hesitance in that process. So while things come together. So maybe we're seeing someone designing something and not liking it and playing with it, for instance. Yeah, I can get the idea. So there's just, and this object basically gets, materiality, scale in the process, and then eventually. So here we're seeing the, staging of it on a desk as a model. Yeah, perhaps a working table, for instance, a physical model being tested. And here we're seeing the scale change, that how it becomes a different scale of the scale of the model actually changes according to the entourage around it. It's a bigger model, smaller model. And eventually the demise happens. That pretty much summarizes the process of the project. So this attention to detail and inner workings marks also an interest in our office for interpretations of familiar, ordinary, boring, banal architecture questions and their capacity for nuanced engagement with reality. Here, for instance, I'm showing you a project that's a commissioned house, which is work in progress that we're working right now, which investigates parts of a house in its composition and interpretation of domesticity and construction. So I think probably with this project, a kind of questions about a construction site and building, there will be other kinds of questions that kind of pop up, I think, in the process in our work, I'm thinking. So I wanted to conclude, I hope we're okay with time, with the Pavilion of Turkey project. This is the last project I'm going to show. At this year's Venice Architecture Biennale that was mentioned in the beginning, which we completed at the beginning of this summer, and still on view in Venice. I know you're close, you're not as far away from this Venice from like me. If you want to see it and didn't get a chance, There's still 1 week to see it. There's time. So I acted both as the chief curator as well as the designer for this exhibition. It opened following an open call and a 2-stage competition evaluation. The selection committee picked our project in September 2019, but the exhibition was postponed due to the COVID for 1 year. So we had worked on this project for twice the amount, which actually goes for all the participants of Venice this year. The project expands on the provocations of the architecture measure project and some of the topics that I mentioned before, but more towards specificities of construction and more specifically situated in Turkey. The exhibition project takes the book, my book, Architecture Measure, as a theoretical preamble and proposes to think about architecture's planetary potential from within its inner workings. The project is presented through an installation, an online publication, and storytelling. We look at the politics and nuances of the seemingly mundane aspects of architectural construction, and we juxtapose these aspects with their larger scale planetary dimensions, which are geographies of resource extraction, material supply chains, and maintenance and care in Turkey and beyond. The installation is located in the Arsenale and is titled 4 Dioramas, which consists of a quartet of rooms. Each diorama stages both a generic site of architecture with banal details and the specific mise-en-scène of an imaginary story taking place in Turkey. Because we're looking at the inner workings of architecture, though, what we're talking about here is not an argument for solving things in small steps. On the contrary, it means that we have to begin to understand those seemingly mundane and unimportant elements of architecture and see them as related to much larger and structural problems and issues. It means that we have to begin to understand that these seemingly mundane and unimportant elements of architecture are related to those larger issues. Here, for instance, to kind of use maybe the publication content to make the point, then I will follow with the installation. Here, I'm showing you on the left, actually, I'm showing you 2 images from our publication contributors to our exhibition side by side. On the left, you're seeing a photograph of a quarry at the urban edge of Istanbul, side by side with a kind of BIM catalog, which is widely used in architectural construction. So this is really the point, that what happens when you think about these things in relation to one another. These were press release images of the project that, because the project took 2 years, we had to think about inventive ways to really sneak peek our project. Like, how do you kind of use the 2 year as a kind of process in the project? So we created these kinds of drawings that show the dioramas, actually show them in construction as unfinished model that we're actually working on, and which kind of spurred some kind of curiosity actually for the audience as well. Here we see parts of the diorama. Maybe some people saw these images and thought that we're going to exhibit this, but that was not the case. Slowly getting putting together. So the dioramas are positioned next to one another in the pavilion space in a lateral axis. This is about 6,000 square feet pavilion exhibition space. This is how it's aligned as a plan of 4 dioramas. So there's like seating and a table on the corner. And here you see how it's literally situated in the physical space of the diorama itself. The pavilion itself, not diorama. And here you see how it's the photograph of how it's really positioned from one edge, from the table side to the edge. Here, some drawings, the kind of oblique perspectives of the kind of elongated 4 dioramas. And here, as you will see, that we split the kind of dioramas to 2 sides so that when you walk, you always see something. Because if you put all the dioramas on the same face, then the kind of back wall maybe would be just, these giant masses. We were interested in that kind of flipping of the 2 sides. And here, a little, peek to the kind of details of how these forms come together, how they kind of, create these like weird connections, and how do you resolve that? Let me play it again, just because I think it was quick. Okay. So visitors can walk inside the dioramas as if they are in the interior space of an architecture model. As the dioramas collide the architectural and the planetary, the banal and spectacular, and the everyday and the mythical, the ideas of foreground and background are literally and constantly flipped and negotiated. Diorama, which is generally used, as I mentioned before, as a device to idealize nature and historical events in museums, is purified from this mystery because they are now used in this project as devices to tell more difficult stories and of, again, resource extraction, pollution, and injustice within the context of climate change. The first diorama is a diorama of quarry. So each diorama is actually a site, an architectural site, from quarry to a kind of large depot to the construction site and a site of maintenance. This is the diorama of quarry, the first diorama. It's a marble quarry. We are inside that space. Maybe centuries from now, we are actually in a natural history museum in Turkey, and we're looking at dioramas and experience part of a story that talk about what happened in the past in relation to climate change in Turkey. The story is about multi-species survival and solidarity, and it presents an archaeology of an imaginary future that takes place in Turkey. There are a lot of references in the drawings, they are situated in Turkey, and they reflect on our current moment. There's sound in this. This is the, in the back, you see this very big back wall drawing. So here we're zooming into that drawing and seeing that drawing. So the diorama of quarry depicts a marble quarry abandoned after centuries of resource extraction in an ancient land. See a view towards an open-air museum and witness the extractive construction activities of perhaps archaic time. In the story, the ancient land is a site of cultivation, repair, and cultural heritage, in which various ruins from previous centuries are collected. In addition, we see these spoil tips of things that are actually industrial waste, but they are shaped to various mountains from different areas of Anatolia, Turkey. These fake mountains are surrounded by replicas of ancient large-scale infrastructures like dams, nuclear power plants, cooling towers, ruins of solar geoengineering, etc. The second diorama is diorama of logistics. It's a large warehouse enabling a massive transit during a multi-species migration to a land. So the dioramas are doing actually a double work. On the one hand, each of them are distinct sites. So when you go into them, you're just presented with like very banal, things of construction, worker boots, measure, things that are very, very familiar to us, to architects, in the foreground. But in the background, a story is being told to you through these drawings, a fictional story. So again, it's the view of that depot, and you see these kinds of materials in the story being circulated, meaning things are moving from this ancient land to a new place. The diorama of maintenance and care is a site of repair in this new land. So the story talks about how the ancient land is not usable anymore, so that there is this kind of migration to another place, where both the built structures and endangered more than human beings are continually given maintenance and care. Here is the kind of diorama from the front, and we're seeing also even kind of buildings themselves become buildings for these more than human actually beings, and these are all endangered kind of animals and fish in this case. And then there's even the kind of maintenance of that thing. So there's this acknowledgement that you have to clean that surface. There is always that kind of aspect and dimension. So here, again, let's do the same thing. We're scrolling through that big drawing. In this case, it was much bigger because it's the biggest diorama in the kind of space. Referred to in the story as first inhabitants. These animals and trees are excited for this new beginning in this new land, for an new era of earthly survival, and a celebration of sharing and living together. So this is the zoom of that kind of aquarium, let's say, the new aquarium in that landscape. Still being cleaned and maintained. There's always like the skin that dimension is there. And finally, the fourth diorama is diorama of formwork, which is a site of reconstruction for the future inhabitants of the Earth. Here we're seeing, again, an oblique frontal view of the diorama. And I forgot to mention this, but you can walk between the dioramas. There is that kind of lateral axis, like an enfilade of rooms next to one another. And here is a frontal view of that diorama. We see a drawing. In this case, this diorama is a little different because that back wall, this wallpaper, is replaced with actually this formwork. And we see a drawing small in this case. That was a flip that we made in this one. And that drawing that we saw, the small, I mean, relatively, in this context is small, but it's actually still a big drawing. We see a century of repair and care have passed in the new land with the arrival of first inhabitants that we saw in the previous diorama. So these dioramas are giving a kind of sequential story. If you move from one, you know, it's kind of sequential. So this new land now in this drawing is a historical site populated with all kinds of new species who are the new caregivers of this land. In the distance, various statues of more than human imaginaries of the ancient land. For instance, some of these things are kind of imaginary kind of creatures from folk stories, actually, folklore in Anatolia, kind of human and more than human, with a kind of human head, but an animal body. These are mythical kind of images, actually, from Turkish culture of like Anatolia. We see those things and monuments for these species and first inhabitants, let's say. And also these more than human imaginaries, this is one example, as well as carbon monuments that can be seen. And all of these things hint to the new mythologies of this new land. And you know, this maybe is the new inhabitant. It's a different species that's habiting actually that landscape. And here, this detail, nobody would probably, you know, it needs an explanation, but it's actually a kind of map of the Earth that's showing exactly where Turkey is, which is 50,000, basically 50,000 million years before. No, am I right? Yes. Before now. So we don't even see the territory of the land of Turkey. So there is that kind of ancient past, right, juxtaposed with the kind of, you know, far future. So in an exhibition that looks at the relationship between the inner workings of architecture and planetary imagination, it was very important for us at NEMESTUDIO to rethink the inner workings and techniques of architectural exhibitions themselves. Rather than conceptualizing the architectural exhibition as a space that can only be active through visualization of research, for instance, like text and images and information of publication. We didn't want to do that. Or it kind of only can actually become something through program, meaning like a giant void can also only be activated through program. We also didn't want to do that. But we wanted to design the exhibition space like a giant model, like an architectural model that is a diorama from outside, but you're almost like inhabiting the kind of space of the model, right, as an audience, but also you're inhabiting the space of the stage, because dioramas are not meant to be entered. In dioramas like theater stages, you always watch them and then be gratified with the experience. Here, you're entering the audience as part of the stage. They're inside, and you can, you know, interpret that literally, but also when you're inside in that kind of yellow environment, you have to think about, you know, that environment. You have to just decide what you want to do with it. So we're putting that audience on stage in that case. And we did also, there was a lot of, actually this is pre-COVID, but there were a lot of ideas to kind of use these dioramas as kind of maybe theater plays, like we would, you know, maybe commission a kind of, the story that is told with the drawings in the back could be enacted with a real play, inside the space, but it became obviously impossible with the kind of restrictions and the kind of things of COVID-19, but still we have these drawings to kind of illustrate those kinds of ambitions of the project. So this is more and more explanatory of how it works and how you walk from one another. And also there are these kinds of guidelines. The text is not, apart from the curatorial text in the kind of entrance, these texts next to the dioramas are a kind of story. They're just telling the story to you, helping you to read the story. So in addition to the installation, there's also, we worked on, as I said, there was a publication component of the project, a website. We didn't do, another thing we decided was that we didn't want to publish a physical exhibition catalog. This was like a position we had in the very beginning that, tons of prints and books that are producing these kinds of events collected in bags and then trash, nobody reads them. We wanted to kind of make it a process, first of all, where we started, because the project was extended, we started the publication of this website 6 months before the opening of the exhibition. So this exhibition started actually with this website, with content, but also throughout, we thought, how many people really go to Venice? Not because just COVID, how many people can buy that thing? So we wanted to also reach out to a wider audience with having the website as a book. So the book is really the website itself. The content was uploaded as, is just to give you a sneak peek of what it looks like. The website, it's composed of 4 sections. Just to lure you in it a little bit. But and then each published piece, so this kind of relationship between digital and physical, right, was in the project, but also in the publication as well, where we imagined these pieces that are uploaded on the website also as almost like PDFs that you can download. They are designed both for the website and as book spreads that you can print and curate your own digital printed catalog for this exhibition, instead of sometimes you buy something and only read 5 essays. So you kind of compile your own curator of your own exhibition catalog as the visitor. So the paperwork, so the exhibition like a book has 4 sections, and the first one, which comprised of our own as curatorial team, we did research and wrote these pieces, but also invited others from Turkey and other places to kind of submit their contributions. In the paperwork section, we look at the bureaucracy of architectural documents that enact, facilitate, and normalize protocols of extraction, maintenance, construction, and labor. For instance, here, this piece is about the typical architecture. We're seeing a typical architectural contract provided by Turkish Chamber of Architects, and we're questioning some of the language in that contract. The episode section is another section in the website, which actually restages selected content from these, the wall drawings that we looked. And don't forget, we started to publish these things before the installation was built. So we were really, staging these things, these stories in a different setting, which are decomposed in this case here, and they were all going to get composed and get together in the physical exhibition itself. So the episode section tells stories and dwell on the stories that it's actually being told in the installation. And then the 2 other sections, conversations and essays, we met with scholars, construction workers, anthropologists, different disciplines and different contributors to the thing that we call architecture, and had conversations about, in this case, this is in Turkish, it's about bureaucracy. It's both English and Turkish websites. So this is the screenshot from the Turkish part. And also the dioramas in the pavilion showcase some of the content of this publication. And they are actually more presented, not so much as, you sit down and read this thing, but more of kind of peeking. So it's a kind of triggering your curiosity that if you want to go to the website so you can, they're mostly presented as part of the mise-en-scène of the kind of space of the diorama itself. So through its focus on the entangled relationship between the quotidian and the planetary, architecture and measure and for Dioramas suggest another route for architecture's relation to the world, in which it's more of an agent than just a respondent. It aspires to provoke another form of inner focus and thus engagement for architecture. So what I'll do is I have a little conclusive paragraph, like a thing to say. And when I'm saying that, you can just enjoy the, there's a bit of a, this is the Turkish version of the video. I thought it would be more interesting. So this is a video that we did because not many people, this exhibition opened in May and restrictions, like COVID restrictions were even higher at that time. So this was a video created for wider audience so that they can experience the exhibition as if they're just walking around it and etc. So to conclude, I believe that there are two reasons, or maybe more, why it's important to think about architecture in the ways that I presented to you today. First is to think about the powerful relationship between imagination and realism in relation to one another. Instead of understanding realism as description of facts, or instead of understanding imagination just as avoidance of confrontation with the real, I'm interested in slightly unfamiliar realisms, that imagination and realism are constant, interaction with one another. And you can flip to one's own immediately, very quickly. Second is their provocation for new forms of attention, for how we see and how we learn to see. A search for perhaps other imaginations and representations. And perhaps all of this research is one of the many important steps to get to that planetary imaginary that I'm striving for. So I wanted to just, I'm not going to show you the entire thing, just I thought, as if all of us are in there and walking together, I thought would be a nice way of ending this. You will hear me speaking Turkish in the meantime, describing things. But to give you, again,
proje, bir enstalasyon,
I already told you these things. These are Turkish versions of what I told you already.
Mimari inşanın ilk başta sıradan gibi görünen özelliklerinin
you get the idea, I think, but I'm happy to show that I'm also interested. So let's just walk around it and then I'll...
Architecture as Measure başlıklı kitabım.
So here, at least to get a sense of how it's situated as a thing in space. I think we should just end. So that's it.
Thank you very much. I feel like I could be, continue watching these beautiful videos, especially the one that you were showing us now at the very end. And maybe if I may, I just want to start with that project at the Biennale, and me saying that I want to keep on watching is because it seems, this sets or kind of scenographic dioramas that you created, they are, and that goes for other projects as well, but they're so layered in a way, right? They contain, I would say, a lot of information, right? Which is, which I think is at times maybe hidden from a certain kind of audience, but presents itself to another one. And it's kind of an interesting play, I don't know, I know that you talk about this work also as forms of representation, right? The sets and the dioramas, but they're presentation at the same time. So I am interested kind of the question of audience, right? Who experience of things. If you could talk a little bit about that, especially also because, certain, I don't want to use a specific word yet, but, let's say a certain unbuilt work in architectural history has been very influential for architects. But other audiences, for them, I guess, right? Not so important, I would say, or actually even not understandable to some effect. So I was wondering who would you like to talk to?
I think that, that's a great question. Thanks for that. And I think, maybe we can use the pavilion because that's the last one. And I think probably maybe we can reflect to other projects. But in the context of the pavilion, I'm so pleased to hear the word layered because that's a word that popped up a lot in our conversations, sometimes even in an exhaustive way, that we were even, it's like layers and layers of not so much that there's so much to understand, more that are people going to appreciate these layers like as much as we do. So the thing is that, and I think that there was this analogy of almost like a kind of, it's like a deep, conceptually, like a deep hole, right? And you just like peek in the surface, you can just remain in the surface of this project, right? You can just, for instance, enjoy the yellow aesthetics and look at the form. Like that would be the kind of, let's say, an audience, either architects, artists, anyone who is really interested in like a kind of creative practice, they would enjoy that, right? That's the most it's like you can even skim through the whole thing and leave. That's probably the quickest. I don't want to, it's not quickest actually. So maybe somebody just can read that and spend like half an hour in here and just not look at the information, but really appreciate it as an aesthetic thing. So, and then once somebody says, well, what if it's almost like we capture them. Like the first question that they ask, depending on how they want to enter into the conversation, they're like, I would say that it is obviously, and it's a multiple audience project and it should be able to work that way. And I know that, by the way, in the context of the pavilions and the Venice Biennale in general, we looked at who comes to the Biennale, literally, and in the context of the installation, not because the web publication is, open to everyone. But and then it's interesting because a lot of students, Italian students mostly, come as part of their curriculum, kids, high school. And in some ways, we were interested in that question of audience, literally in this case, the exhibition viewer. And who are they? Like, it's not just architects, right? And we always tend to think of it that way, that we're communicating one another, which happens in this project. Like, there's a lot of things that are communicating to architects themselves. I mean, that's clear. But we were interested in almost, that's why we thought the storytelling component is, and a spatial experience component would be a bit more interesting also for non-architectural audiences too. Because, I mean, think about it. And that's what I was trying to say, that somehow in the way that we think about exhibitions today, that there's been tons of exhibitions, good ones produced for the last maybe 15 years. And this kind of research design or research work being presented in exhibition has become a usual practice. And I think it was very helpful. But at the same time, it's a bit of a bombardment sometimes, right? Like to expect a person to experience the exhibition like a book, which is not the case. It's not a book. If there is a physical dimension to experience here, it cannot be deduced to almost as if you're reading a book. You're moving in, out, walking, approaching, distancing. There's depth, there's shallowness. So we were interested in using those literal kind of conditions of the physical, meaning depth, move. Like diorama is like a 2D, it's like almost like a live image. You're like, but then you move, it's actually a model. So you enter to it. So your movements and your intellectual curiosity or bodily movements are kind of interrelated, right? So in terms of, we can take your question to a broader sense too, of what is the audience for this whole work in general too, which would be a nice maybe thing. But for the context of the Pavilion of Turkey, I think it's architects, architecture related, I mean, obviously the exhibition viewers in that case, students, architectural students, that's the maybe inner core circle. But then if you go out from that, people who have no relationship to design or architecture, to kind of capture their imagination in terms of climate change, and because they know that it's an important topic, and somehow have them kind of interrelate like aesthetics to content. And I'm not really, for me, these kinds of things are not about like lessons, like pedagogy, or they go in and they're like totally informed. And I'm much more interested in curiosities and confusions, even sometimes productive ones, obviously, so that you strive for more. You want to read more. And that was for the publication component then. If we put QR codes on the prints themselves, and there are exhibition people who are working obviously full time in there, and their feedback is that it was really used. People, use their phones to go to the QR code and log into the website, and maybe they will read other things in relation to these topics later on. So the website's audience in that case is a bit more different, especially from geographic sense, meaning all parts from everywhere from the world can just log in and read articles and have an interaction with content, and even experience some of the stories of the installation through digital means was interesting to us. So I think that I'm interested in multiple, obviously, audiences, and that layering that you mentioned, I'm so glad that you were reading it that way, is pretty much that the most nerdy, like by nerdy, I mean someone who's fully, maybe there are like 5 people like that in the world, who are fully, like 100% are engaged with this project like we do, like the curatorial team, is the deepest part of that whole, meaning like step by step, you ask more questions, go there, but between the deepest, part of the whole and the surface, there is many layers and layers of engagement, I think, to the project, and we are interested in that.
And I think I just really felt that through its physical and through its, whatever digital dimension in case of a website, right, which kind of is not a replica, or it doesn't necessarily reproduce the same information, in a different kind of medium, right? But it's really trying to, I wrote down when you were talking, it's really somehow not only the last project, but some of other projects that you also show. It's kind of like, the I don't even know, the technique or the tactic of maybe even colliding two, very opposed scales against each other, it does open up gaps. And I have the feeling in the project of Venice, these gaps are, are offered to the audience to fill in with their own, right? However, it gets you thinking, it gets you, wondering maybe about a detail, but then it's also, I have the feeling one jumps from frame of reference to frame of reference, from in to out, the scale play. It's a very dynamic association process that starts happening in one's hand when one reads this, when one looks at your work, I would say. And
go ahead, Sarah, yeah.
No, and I think that's just fascinating, one also wants to revisit, because the journey, it seems it's never the same, no? It's kind of like, whatever. Yeah. So that's something I think a very successful part, as I feel, of your contribution to the Biennale, and kind of like the experience of, of what we do, and or what architecture can do. Yeah. In a certain way. I'm not so sure, maybe my second question in terms of kind of like, also relation to research, let's say, and not necessarily methods, but also maybe kind of approaches, right? I'm not sure if you would feel comfortable there, but I wrote down kind of like speculative imagination, kind of in the realm of the speculative, where you would where you practice, I guess, let's call it like that. Would you feel comfortable in this kind of speculative research? I don't know if it's a category or whatever it is.
I think I would. I think that, but I would want more, like, meaning from myself or my work. But what I mean by that is, I think that somehow. I'll respond to the first part and then come to the speculative. Sure. The scale shifts or juxtapositions are, again, your reading of these things are fantastic, because we kind of, even without seeing it, I think you're reading into it in a way, and something like, deciphering, obviously, our sensibilities through the making of it. And this kind of large and small juxtaposition is very dear to me. It's important for me, because that's pretty much the whole core of what I'm trying to do, which is, and not only like the small and the big are related, they always feed each other, but more of, because when we think about questions of the planetary, climate change, and we always tend to think of them as really larger issues, either conceptually beyond architecture or literally larger landscapes, always the kind of large scale. But here, my ambition is to really bring it home, to say that, that's why we have a room. We have these mundane construction kind of around you, and to kind of understand that there's no such thing as, just, circular, architecture. There's outside of architecture. Everything is all one thing, in the end. And that scale juxtaposition is almost like the kind of everyday one-to-one things we do, small scale stuff we do are important. It's not like they are, they matter. And we need to evaluate them even more. We need to evaluate our histories even more, like architectural histories, our canons. What do we teach? How is it chosen? Hierarchies. So all of these things are actually equally important when you question planetary or climate change. So for me, that's why there are rooms, you get inside them, they're interiors, right? So that juxtaposition is really, really important. So for instance, you don't see larger maps here. Even in the back wall drawings, you see a view, meaning it's the wallpapers, because it's a diorama, is in the same scale of the diorama itself. Like it's almost like you're inside and looking to a landscape. It's the same scale. So I think that going to your question about the speculation or speculative imagination and this kind of practice, that's one can first, like, think about or question or think together about the potential of that, right? But at the same time, I think that I'm interested to continue this kind of practice, but at the same time, I think that I'm also very okay and let's say value the flip side of it, which is it's not like, you know, just because everything is critical and there is, you know, discussions, criticisms, that you're distancing yourself from building and architecture and talking about things. Obviously, they're like mirrors, right? It's a form of research through design, speculation through design. But at the same time, I'm interested in the flip side of it, where you are maybe doing conventional architecture, that you're building buildings, but it's not like when you, whatever non-speculative version of this would be, I think that in that world, how do you bring the sensibility to that world is something that also interests me. I don't find it's life and opportunities and, you know, things as come up, but I don't have that division. I feel that somehow a person who practices like that should be able to have also impact, right, to the actual practice of things. And for me, imagination is really important in that context. Yes, I'm also, you know, a teacher. So imagination is like, it's a mentality thing, like especially when we think about these larger questions. That's why I find it powerful, the speculative practice or speculative imagination. But at the same time, it doesn't mean that it's the only platform. Right. It's the only way to be engaged. It's the only place that you can be speculative. Does that make sense? Like, I am totally for speculative, which if by speculative we mean pushing things beyond the realm of things, yes, but I don't think the platform of it has to, which in the past 10 years it has been like installations, exhibitions, but it doesn't have to be. I think that and this is the question that interests me, that not for myself, also for, you know, future generations and other practices of how do you negotiate that? What is a speculative practice also as someone making buildings or using normative, you know, or teaching or pedagogy? There are different, I think, platforms, and I'm totally okay and interested, more than okay, interested to test these platforms, like to kind of, you know, push their limits in a way. And I think everywhere can be that. It doesn't just have to be installations and drawings. We'll see if I'll be able to do anything like that in the future, but I'm interested in that question.
Maybe the last comment kind of from my side goes a little bit back again, but I think you know, also the idea goes back to your book and to the Biennale thing that we saw, but maybe it even goes a little bit further back to your book, Architecture as Measure, which you know, I found very interesting a little bit to figure out what to do with the measure thing in the title, and when one goes into inquiry of that, I was actually quite interested to stumble upon it's actually a text by Heidegger, and it talks about measure, and measure in his text is kind of connected to poetic dwelling. So it's nothing, how do I say it? It's nothing technical. It's nothing necessarily quantifiable in a very, you know, rational, numerical way, but it's really almost kind of like again, it could be something like you know, a method measuring out, measuring up against something, right? It's like the stepping out. It offers so many possibilities to kind of look at oneself or look at the discipline, right? And I thought that that's such a rich I don't know, chamber to and door to open. So I was wondering actually if you could talk a little bit about you know, measure, and what measure is for you also in your work.
I love your questions. I mean, honestly, I have to say, or the way that you are engaging with the work and thinking about it. So that if I were to send you my favorite questions, like those would be the three. Like it's as if we talked before, we didn't. So I really like that. So the thing is that the measure, exactly as you said, that I'm actually interested in there are probably a lot of people misinterpreting that, like as if this book is about quantifying things, you know,
exactly.
Architecture as measuring things, like making them more comprehensible, because measure is an idea that the architecture has been fascinated with, like you know, from the modular man, like it's just there is always like body as a measure, and from the, you know, measures of the body, there's a golden, I mean, I don't know, kind of, it's always about this kind of quantifiable thing. Mm-hmm. But in the book and kind of conceptual framework is that when we say architecture is measure, it's more exactly actually how we described, which is somehow looking at itself. Measure, you know, when you English, you're measuring something. You're yes. Trying to think it's like that when I was describing the diorama, that someone in the middle of the diorama, it's like figuring it out. And how can architect, if we think of architecture that way, if architecture is on stage, right? How can we kind of reassemble the earth? How can we reconstitute things? How can we, in this case, there's a double thing, because we always want to think that architecture is separated with larger things. It's not, right? Like it has the capacity to contribute. And at the same time, it's really simply, as you said, like looking back to itself, like, what do you think? What do you say? What can architecture do? And that term, and I kind of like the confusion, to be honest, because architects love measure, like, and we do have little measures also in the, like, you know, the stuff we use in construction and stuff, you know, the kind of, you know, is it 5 meters, 6 meters, precision, and all those terms are things like we grew up with in either education or our practice. And it's kind of playing with that in a way. But the main course is the measuring of the discipline itself. So in relation to, in this case, climate change. But and trying to, the answer to that measure is not a quantifiable, it's not about statistics, it's not about being, you know, kind of objectified universal things, but more messy things, more trying to appreciate the messiness of things, not appreciate in terms of like they're great, but you know, what happens when you accept things as they are and then plug architecture into it. Anyway, that would be a bit of a framing of that.
Fantastic. Dear Neyran, this was for me quite fantastic. I do wanna just shout out to the live stream which covers the room. If anybody, you know, has any question or any comment, anybody feels wants to share, please feel free to do so, since you know, this is also meant to be not only a conversation among us, but if anybody is obviously welcome to join in. And I'm sorry, I should have done that at the beginning, so you know, now everybody's like, oh my god, what do I say? But if there are, so what's the maybe the last question? So the next project, you say it seems like it might be a build one, right? But you also said that in a way you are interested in exploring both routes, right? There are some that are connected to creating this, you know, sets or whatever of work, and then the next thing, it seems it's the build. It's maybe a build thing that comes out.
Yeah, I think I'm interested in, I don't know, I mean, I wouldn't be able to give a 5-year plan, but my desires are to kind of focus on that question of practice, actually. And I've written something recently called Another Practice, which still is this almost like asking, you know, if you look at this pavilion, the Dioramas, and it says, we need to look at the inner workings of the discipline to be able to have an impact, or more like another kind of focus. The question is, what are other possibilities? Meaning, once you accept that, what can you do is what interests me right now, instead of just exhibiting that point to the public. Does that make sense? That yes. Somehow, how are those kinds of sensibilities to inner workings would propagate other forms of practice, other forms of attention to what we do as architects? So yes, the desire would be to be able to do it with different shift of maybe kind of format, either buildings or other things. But that's what is in my mind these days of broadly the question of practice. I know I took your question and made it bigger, but
no, it's totally fine. I think it's an interesting point, no? How to not that it doesn't do that, but how to make it in a different way. I mean, I'm gonna say instrumental. Not sure if it's the right word, right? But it's kind of when it takes that state of instrumentality also, right?
Yeah, and I totally. You're both teachers. We're all here as part of the school, and I do, by the way, honestly, and think sincerely that pedagogy is also part of it too. That yes, maybe the most instrumental yes. thing in the world is pedagogy. So I'm not. That's always going to be in the radar, and but I think that yes, you're right. The impact part of how can that imagination spur, propagate other, not just me instrumentalizing it, but how does that become a more collective discourse? That like the whole example, like the layers and layers of impact, like small, big. How do you create that? I actually think pedagogy and schools had one of the most powerful actually places to kind of build up that consciousness for students and the future practitioners. So that's one, and many others that can be built. So I'm hopeful in the end. Maybe we can close with that.